If you have your Bibles with you today, you can open up to the Gospel of John, chapter 9, and we are going to read it. We are going to read it in its entirety today. John chapter 9, verses 1 to 41. Originally, this was not the passage that I was going to preach on this Easter Sunday. But a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Mike Yoon, one of our pastoral interns, was leading prayer meeting, and he shared on John chapter 9. And it just really gripped my heart. And in John chapter 9, we are going to see that Jesus opens the eyes of a man who was born blind. That this man who was born blind, that he receives his sight. And what God spoke through Pastor Mike, and I really believe that it was God who spoke this through Pastor Mike, is what do we have to lose? When you think about this man who was born blind, what did he have to lose? And that just really gripped my heart. As we read through this chapter, this man, just again, to really understand this story, you have to put yourself in this man's shoes. You just have to do your best, okay? You have to try to put yourself in the shoes of this man who was born blind. Jesus opened his eyes, and we're told that he sees. Okay, this is important, right? The question that I need you to answer is, what does he see? Okay, this is very important. Jesus opens his eyes, and we're told that he sees. And if you read this passage really carefully, we're told what he sees. Okay, this is important. Okay, so that's the key. What does this man see? John chapter 9, verses 1 to 41, this is the word of God. As Jesus passed by, and he's passing by the temple, he was in the temple area. As Jesus passed by, probably one of the gates of the temple, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said these things, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is he." Others said, "No, but he is like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." So they said to him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" And they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Why, this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes? We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You who were born in utter sin, would you teach us?" And they cast him out. Now Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, 'We see,' your guilt remains." 3 questions that we need to answer from this text. 1, who? This is a very simple story if you think about it. There's a man who was born blind. Jesus opens his eyes. And that's it. This story is 41 verses. This is a long story. The reason it's a long story, because most of the time, they're trying to verify who this man is. They want to know, who is this man? That's the important question that has to be answered. Because if this man is who he says he is, that has implications for who Jesus is. If this man really was blind at birth, if he is who he says he is, and he now sees because Jesus opened his eyes, then the answer to the question of who is he also has implications to the question, who is he? Who is Jesus? You understand? Who is this man? And who is this man? We need to answer the question, who? We need to answer the question, how? Many times they ask, how? How were your eyes open? How did you receive your sight? And the last question that we need to answer is what? So Jesus opened his eyes. Imagine, I don't know if words can even describe the first time your eyes are open, if you've never seen before. Amazing, marvelous. Imagine all of the things that this man saw. But again, what does he see? That's an important question. So who? Who is this man? We're told two things about this man. We're told that he is a man who was blind at birth. And this is important because there are 6 stories of blind receiving sight in the Bible. But only once are we told that somebody was blind at birth. And even at the end of the story, this man goes on to say, never has it been heard from the beginning of the world, from the beginning of time, that someone who has been born blind would see. The emphasis is placed on how remarkable this miracle is, how impossible it is. It's so impossible that this man wasn't even looking for a miracle. Do you understand? Other people who are blind in the Bible, other people who go to Jesus, they ask Jesus, I want to see, right? They say, open my eyes, I want to see. This man doesn't ask Jesus to open his eyes. It's not by his initiative. Even when the people ask him, well, where is Jesus? What does he say? Oh, I don't know. This isn't something that he wanted to happen to him. Jesus found him and Jesus made it happen to him. He didn't even think that it was possible. He was a man who was born blind. And because he was a man born blind, we're told that he was a beggar. Now, this story is interesting because it starts with, as he passed by. It doesn't tell us as Jesus passed by. And the fact that the pronoun is used instead of the proper name, it's a hint that this story is connected to the previous story. And in the previous story, Jesus is at the temple. And Jesus is telling the people at the temple about himself, and they're about to stone him to death. And so he leaves the temple. And so Jesus, he's leaving the temple, and as he's passing by, he's probably passing by one of the temple gates. Because that's where the beggars would be. Beggars would wait by the gates of the temple seeking alms, help. This man is seeking help, but he just wants money. I don't even know if he really knows who Jesus is. when he gives the answer, how did this happen? Well, the man called Jesus. I don't even know if this man who was born blind really knows too much about Jesus. But what you need to know about this man is that he had given up all hope that his life could change. You need to feel it. His parents had given up all hope. Maybe they had hope in his earlier years. Maybe they thought over time he would get better. But one thing that you need to realize is that this man who was born blind had no hope that his life was going to change. And so when Jesus spat on the ground and made mud, and again, when you think of Jesus doing that, where else in the Bible does Jesus make mud? We're not told explicitly, but in Genesis chapter 2, we're told that God forms the man from the dust of the ground. Right? If you're going to form, if you ever played with dirt, it's got to be wet. I think it's taking you back to creation. That this Jesus is the God who created humanity. It's the God who created this man. Because Jesus is the God who has created this man, he can fix him. He spits on the ground, he makes mud, right? And it's probably just a little bit. Imagine how much mud you can make with spit, right? I mean, we're not talking a lot of mud, right? He makes some mud, and he anoints his eyes. And if you were this man born blind, I don't know how you would feel, but maybe you'd be offended. I don't know if you would care for a man to come up to you all of a sudden and put spit on the ground and put that on your face like this. You might be like, who the heck do you think you are, and what are you doing touching me? What, just because I'm blind, you think you can disrespect me and treat me any way you want? But he doesn't say that to Jesus. Right? Jesus does this. He puts some mud on his eyes. He says, go, wash in the pool of Siloam. Why does he even listen to Jesus? Why does he listen? Why does he do what Jesus tells him to do? And this is what God spoke to me through Pastor Mike 2 Thursdays ago. What do you have to lose? What does he have to lose? Wait, is it going to make him more blind? I mean, it's not going to make anything worse. I don't know, but I'm guessing that he's thinking to himself, what do I have to lose? And those words just sunk deep into my heart. Because I think those are really prophetic words. I think God spoke those words through Pastor Mike and convicted my heart. Because I think the word that God has for some of you in this room today is this. What do you have to lose? Believe in Jesus. Follow him. Obey him. What do you have to lose? Some of you in this room, your life is a mess. Maybe it doesn't look like it outwardly, but you know that your life is an utter wreck. Now, you and I both know this. You can hide the mess for a certain amount of time, but sooner or later, the mess is going to spill out. For some of us, the mess has spilled out, and it's evident to other people that our lives are a wreck. But I think for most of us in this room, you know, when you come to church, you don't want anyone to know that you have problems. Right? When you come to church on a Sunday morning, you probably think you're the only one with problems because you look around the room and everybody looks like they have everything together. But we know that's not true. And I know that's not true. And I know because God has spoken to my heart. I know that there are some of you in this room, your lives are a mess. And you have tried to live your life on your own terms. You followed what the world has told you to do. You have followed what you've told yourself to do. And you know that inside, you know who you are. You know that your life is a wreck. And what God is saying to you this morning is, What do you have to lose? Believe me. Would you trust in the risen Jesus to change your life? That he would do for you what he did for this man who was born blind. You understand? This man, on this particular morning, when he got up and sat at the temple gate like he did every other day, he didn't think that his life was going to change. He thought it was going to be an ordinary day. But the reason it wasn't ordinary is because he met the living Jesus. There are some of you this morning, you came here today, and you thought that it was going to be another ordinary day. You thought that your life was just going to be what it was before. But what you didn't realize was this morning that you were going to encounter the living Jesus. And the living Jesus is going to change your life. I don't want to just talk about the resurrection. I don't want to just give lip service to the resurrection. I could have spent time this morning trying to prove to you why you should believe in the resurrection. You know what the greatest evidence of the resurrection is? It may be a changed life. If somebody asked you this morning, so you're a Christian, so you believe in this whole Easter thing, that Jesus rose from the dead? If somebody asked you, why do you believe in the resurrection? Why do you believe that Jesus is alive? Because this is important. This is the most important question that anybody will ever answer. Because nobody doubts that Jesus lived. Jesus is a real historical person who lived in a certain place at a certain time. Just as real as Abraham Lincoln. Just as real as George Washington. Jesus is a historical figure. Nobody denies that. If anybody denies that Jesus existed, it's not even worth having a conversation with them. It's just, you're not going to get anywhere. Historically, nobody denies that Jesus existed. Nobody even denies that Jesus died on the cross. It's a historical fact. The scandal of the Christian faith is the resurrection. Where is Jesus? You can't not answer the question. You can't ignore it. Because if Jesus was a real person, then your answer to that question will determine the answer to who is he. If somebody asked you this morning, why do you believe in the resurrection? If somebody asked you, why do you believe that Jesus is alive? Because that's what we're saying. What would you tell them? And what I want to tell you, and what I think this story even says, perhaps the greatest evidence for Jesus being alive is a changed life. You can't argue with that. You can't argue with a changed life. This man said, I was blind at birth. Now I see. What are they going to say? No, you weren't. You can't argue with a changed life. You might not like it. You might not want to believe it. But you can't argue with a changed life. Because it's a changed life. Who testifies about this change in this man's life? The neighbors living around the temple, right? The people who have seen him begging. I mean, his own parents. I want to challenge you with this. If your life is changed, then other people are going to testify to it. But change can be slow and gradual. I'll say this. For most of us, we're not going to have a man born blind experience immediate change. Sanctification, the process of being made holy, it's a lifelong process. It's gradual changes, little by little, over a lifetime. Even if nobody else around you sees the change, the person whose testimony is most important is this man's. And what does he say about himself? I am the man. You should know, you should be able to say, I'm not the same person I was before. I got a long way to go. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm not the same person that I was before. What do you have to lose? Some of you in this room, that is God's word to you. Would you experience the power of the living Jesus today, just like this man experienced the power of Jesus that day? Now, if that man is who he says he is, and he says that Jesus opened his eyes, then the other question that everyone has to answer is, who is Jesus? And there are two possibilities. The two possibilities is, he's a sinner, or he was sent from God. The word sent is used 3 to 4 times in this passage. We're told that Siloam itself, what does it mean? Sent. This miracle, it proves who Jesus is. That he is the one sent by God. I'm going to show you a really interesting thing about this story. Verse 17. Look at it with me. Verse 17. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him since he has opened your eyes? He said he is a prophet. Do you see what John labeled this man? He labeled him the blind man. The reason that should catch your attention, because that's the only time in this story that John calls him a blind man. Look in verse 13. The man who had formerly been blind. Verse 18. He had been blind. Verse 18 later. The parents of the man who had received his sight. It's all past tense. He was no longer blind. But in verse 17, John doesn't say, and they said to him again to the man who had formerly been blind. He says, and they said again to the blind man. Why does John call him blind? He's still blind, but I thought he wasn't blind. And I think it has to do with his answer. Who is this man? Who is Jesus? And he says he is a prophet. And I think John is trying to give you a clue. He doesn't see yet. He's still blind. His eyes haven't been opened to the reality of who Jesus is yet. I think it's a hint. It's a real subtle hint. But go home, do your homework, look at it. Never in this story does John refer to him as the blind man. It's always the man who had received his sight, the man formerly been born blind. The answer to the question, who is this man, will also answer the question of, who is this man? How? How did this happen? Jesus spat on the ground, made mud, put it on his eyes, and told him to go, wash in the pool of Siloam. This is a very interesting thing. What's the controversy behind this miracle? The controversy behind this miracle is that when did it happen? It happened on the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, the Jews were to do no work. Correct? They were to do no work. And the problem that the Pharisees have with this miracle is that Jesus worked on the Sabbath. So I don't have the time, but 2 times before this, he explains. He spat on the ground, made mud, made mud, put it on my eyes, and then told me to work, told me to go. This is working. Go and wash in the pool of Siloam. See, this blind man, he even knows what the controversy is. So look at what he says. When it says to, how did he open your eyes? Look at what he says in verse 15. He doesn't give the same answers. He says this, and he said to the Pharisees, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. What a simplified version. There's no controversy in that. Jesus didn't work. He didn't tell me to work. It's just a miracle. Do you see what he did? He took out the work. When he explained how it happened, he took out the making and the doing. He just put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. That's the controversy. Does this story not frustrate you? This story frustrates me because there's these Pharisees. They have a man in front of him who was born blind, and he sees. And they don't believe. And they're doing everything they can to try to disprove that this happened. And even if it happened, this man Jesus, he's still a sinner. Do you hear the frustration in this blind man's voice? When he answers. Just hear what he says. This is the answer. They say, we do not believe that he comes from God. And he's like, why? This is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes? It's so frustrating. It's so terribly frustrating. What more do you need? But all of us in this room, you would say, if you were the Pharisees, you would believe, right? Come on. You've got this guy in front of you, and you're like, I don't believe. What more do you need? Oh my. Can you talk about stubborn and hard-hearted? Come on. And I tell you this, you have even greater evidence that Jesus is alive. If you're frustrated by these Pharisees, they had a blind man who now sees in front of them. Do you know what you have in front of you? You have an empty tomb. What more do you need to believe? There's an empty tomb in front of you. There is no greater evidence that Jesus is the Son of God. There is no greater evidence that Jesus is alive. And yet, you try to make up excuses for yourself not to believe. You should not be frustrated with these Pharisees. You should be frustrated with your own unbelief. Because the evidence that God has given to you for Jesus is greater. It's far greater than the evidence that these Pharisees have. The tomb is empty. So what does he see? Do you see where it's at? Tell me the verse. Someone tell me the verse. What does he see? We're only told one time. We're told exactly what he sees. Verse 36 and 37. And who is he, sir? Who is the Son of Man? Who is the Christ, that I may believe in him? You see it? The clue. Verse 37. You have seen him. It is he who is speaking to you, and he said, Lord, I believe. This story is not about a blind man receiving physical sight. It's much more than that. It's not his physical sight that saved him. This story is about a blind man who received his sight so that he could see. And what he saw Jesus. That's a miracle. He didn't make it happen. Jesus made it happen. We want to close. I'm going to take some time. We want to sing a song as we close. Again, I want to sing a song because I want us to not just sit here and talk about the resurrection. I want us to experience the power of the resurrection, the power of the living Jesus. That you would say to Jesus, Jesus, change my life. I need my life to be changed. I can't do it. I'm tired of just talking about Jesus and just, coming to church. I want my life to change. And my life be evidence to Jesus. Make my life evidence. Open my eyes. Would you pray with me? And then we're going to sing Fire Fall Down as we close our worship service today. But prayerfully, can we respond to God and to His Word? Why am I so stubborn? Why am I so